I.D.B. Being Tales of the Diamond Fields, retold by George Griffith. The Border Gang, a complete story. Man, you're not telling me. It's the dumbest, barefaced robbery. It's dog eating dog, just cannibalism and business. That's what it is. If that's true, though Sandys, help me, may I never see the glint of a Ganova again if it isn't. There was £3,000 worth on the clips and the poor little Tommy's insides, as you know. The techs pulled me up near the border. In the dark, Tommy slips out of the cart as usual and makes the clumps of guns on the other side of the drift without being seen. The techs find nothing, of course, and drives on, thinking what sort of a lawsuit we shall have in the time against Lipinski and his people crossing the drift and pulls up by the trees. I whistles, and Tommy, like a good obedient little tyke what knows his business, jumps in and... Oh, Lord, to think you've got a beautiful lot so far, only to... well, go on, Ike, and let's have the rest of it. Yes, it is actually written like this in the book. As I says, the dog jumps in and I drives off again. About 100 yards further on both, my horses comes to the ground with a crash, and I goes after them on top of my head. When I comes to myself and picks myself up, there was half a dozen fellows on horseback round the cart. One jumps down, and before I can so much as shout, he has a cloth over my head and ties me up so tight I can neither see nor speak. Then he knocks with his knuckles on my head and tells me if I don't want a bullet in it, I'll keep quiet and be good. Of course, I was as they make it. But the dog, man, why didn't he make a bolt for it when he saw there was trouble? He's been veer we had trained. I'd have thought he might have got away in the scrimmage. He didn't have a chance. I hears him give a smothered yelp and squeal, and from that I knows that he's like my head in a bag. That tells me they had tumbled to the lay, or that there were someone there that knew it. Well, the bundles me and the dog got into the cart and drives away somewhere for about a half an hour. They pulls up, hauls me out, and hustles me into a house of some sort and takes the bag off my head. When I looks about me, I was in a bit of a small room, and there were 4 fellows there, all with masks on. Kidnappers and midnight robbers, maybe. Murderers as well, groaned the Scotchman. Ike, mon, I'm thinking ye had a narrow escape. That's V State's a domned sight too free, if you ask coming to me. It's nothin' better nor savage land without law and order in it. What did they do tell ye, then? They asked me how many clips I got, and where they were, and of course I says I got none. And they can search me if they've likes, and they does, a bit worse than the text did, I can tell you. Of course, they finds nothing, and then they laughs and says if I ain't got them, the dog has. So they pull toward Tommy out of the sack, and swelt me, old pal, I doesn't like to tell you what happened. I'd educated the dog perfect, and I loved the little fellow, and besides, he was worth a lot of money with all he knew. Sandy Fraser's little Hebrew accomplice quite broke down here for a moment or two, and Sandy himself gave a sympathetic sniff, for they had both lost not only a lot of money, but also a guiltless accomplice whom it would be very hard to replace. They murdered him, Sandy, right before my eyes in a big tin footbath, and of course they found the clips. Then they offered to sell them back to me for $2,000 and told me they'd make $500. Yes, sakes, what a murderous price! Blank robbery! Why, they cost us $300 straight from the coffers, and you paid? Well, they was worth $3,000 trade price, and the thieves knew it, so I did. I gave them the draft on the bank here, and they kept me in there till one of them got the cash and brought it back, and then they ties my head up again and puts me in the cart and drives me away to the clips in my pocket. Then they took the bag off. It was night, and I was a little of a kloof. They showed me the right... to Freetown and rode off. I got into Freetown by morning and found Sandham there wondering. Well, I told him the story and got 3,300 out of him for the clips and the strength of it. Then I drives back, breaking my heart about poor little Tommy, and wondering where she'll get another dog like that. That Chinaman's dog that he fooled Louisa so sweetly wasn't in it with poor Tommy. Nay, he wasn't none. Why, Tommy must have run close to 20,000 worth for us, and might have run 20,000 more without suspicion, with that wonderful stomach ache. But here's the dead and gone, and we poor little martyr, and we'll just go and have a drink to his future in the happy hunting grounds. But tell me, Ike, lad, did you have nothing what they were among the thieving murderers might have been? Some of them must have known that they'd never seen us suspecting the dog. They was always masked when I saw any of them, but, Sandy, if I wasn't sure of the death of Lipinski and his chaps did for Seth Salter that night, he ran a big parcel when they got it back. I could swear that the boss of 'em had just his Yankee twang, and his built was unlike neither, replied Ike, whose English was of the Oriental order, and whose tenses changed with the variations of his mental temperature. Now, where was we going to? Let's go to the Queen's, that Lipinski's place. Let's see if he's there, and if he's heard anything about this new gang over the line. When they entered the bar-room, they found Mr. Inspector Lipinski, the famous detective, not only there, but the central figure of what somewhat motley crowd that was wont to foregather since their evening lime juice, to use the conveniently generic term. He was standing, as usual, the most natively dressed man in the place, and one elbow resting on the bar counter, and the half-glass full of whiskey and soda beside him. Opposite to him stood no less a personage than Mr. Michael Mosenson. The events herein be described happened some 2 months after Josie Moe's vicarious conviction, and there seemed to be a discussion over the little heat going on between them. Just as they went in, he slapped his glass down on the mahogany and said in a loud, angry voice, "Of course you fellows never take me on responsibility, unless it's the case of searching private houses or annoying innocent people. But what I say is that this is just as much your affair as a free state police's. Why, don't you combine instead of everlastingly bickering and letting criminals slip through your fingers? If there's been a robbery on this side of the line tonight, there's been one on your side tomorrow, or the night after. As for saying that the parcel was illicit, that's all rot, and neither here nor there. Max Sondheim is a perfectly respectable man. Why, I've done business with him myself scores of times." "I've no doubt you have, Mr. Morrison. I wish I'd been there at the time," replied the inspector with a snap of malice in his tone which sent a chuckling laugh around the crowd and brought out a red spot between Mickey's eyebrows. Before he had his retort ready, Ike pushed his way through the half-circle about them and said with ill-advised anxiety, "What was that? What has happened to Max Sondheim?" "Ah, you blighted idiot," murmured the partner, but he didn't about it on the stage aside, so it wasn't heard. He went to the far end of the counter and ordered a drink, hoping that no one had seen him come in with Ike. The inspector pulled himself up straight and, as he could do on occasions, suddenly assumed an air of authority which kept even the angry Mikey quiet while he answered. "Ah, Mr. Cohen, good evening. So, you've got it back all safe, but you're a bit anxious about your friend Sondheim? Very natural, of course. Well, I'm sure you'll be sorry to hear that a few hours after you left him, say about 10 o'clock last night, he was held up on the road between Freetown and Boshoff by 4 armed and masked men, and robbed of a parcel of stones which he valued at £4,000. I dare say you'll know about here now is the truth. But He rode off to Boshoff and reported, and we have just had the news here by telegraph. By the way, how's that dog of yours?" The crowd noticed unanimously that this was the first time since the story of the diamond dog had become common property of the camp that the inspector had mentioned one of the species publicly, and they closed up a little, thinking there was something coming. Mr. Mussenson, for reasons of his own, paid his apparently exclusive attention to his drink, while Sandy Fraser cursed all Jews and dogs in silence and kept his ears anxiously open. Now, Ike Cohen, though not a strong man, nor yet of the conspicuous pluck, was one of those particularly constituted individuals who gain a sort of secondary courage through stress of circumstances, somewhat as runners get their second wind. From what the inspector had said, he saw that he knew a good deal more about his late adventure, on the other side, than he thought he did. Suspicions are sometimes as good as knowledge. He stuck his hands deep down in his pockets and looked at the inspector squarely in the face and said, "If you want me to spell you a pup, Mr. Lipinski, I'll be happy to oblige you. I can't sell you that one, though, because it's dead. But I think I could tell you the name of the man who ordered it to be killed. Anyhow, I guess you'd recognize his voice. I calculate I did." Ike didn't do the Yankee drawl at all badly, and the shot went straight home. For the first and the last time in his life, Inspector Lipinski lost his self-command in public. But his start was only momentary, and the flush that came to his cheeks died out again in an instant. "What do you mean by that, sir?" he asked, in a tone as calm as usual, but with a distinctly threatening ring to it. "Just about what he says, I reckon," drawled Mickey Morrison, who was about as good a mimic as he was a juggler. "If you don't recognize that twang, I do. That was well done, Ikey boy. What'll you take? The next on me." What might have happened after this no one will ever know, for just at that moment one of the inspector's men hurriedly entered and handed him a note. He opened it and glanced at it, folded it up in his hand, and said, "Gentlemen, I'm sorry, but so far as I'm concerned, this entertainment will have to be postponed. Another man wants to see me very urgently about a dog." With this he drank off the remains of his whiskey and soda, and turned and walked to the door, followed by his official satellite, not a little pleased at such an opportunity could get out from the situation which was bidding fair to becoming embarrassing. It pleased the fates to draw out the tragedy which thus began with the inhuman butchery of poor little Tommy, one of many a like innocent martyr in the unholy case of I.D.B., and to more scenes that could be reproduced here. The present narrative, however, only concerned with the last of them, or perhaps it would be more correct to say the last but one, and that which brought down the curtain. As week after week went by, the outrages committed by the mysterious border gang, as the unknown desperadoes who had suddenly invaded the hitherto comparatively peaceful frontiers of the Free State and Griqualand West very soon came to be called, seemed to increase in number and daring. It was quite a curious situation, such as one of the student of human crime had never had the chance of studying before, and may never have again. It was a sort of three-cornered contest between underhand roguery, open violence, and the forces which worked for law and order. The old struggle between the police and the I.D.B. fraternity went on as before, but with an added terror for the evildoer who, if he eluded the clutches of the law, might the next hour fall into no more merciful grasp of the gang. The honest and lawful trader still hated the I.D.B. as his worst enemy, but the gang robbed both with an impartiality worthy of a more honorable calling. The police naturally had anything but a happy time of it. If they devoted an adequate amount of time and force to hunting the gang, which was never where it was expected or wanted, the occupation of the I.D.B. became comparatively pleasant and easy. While, if they were at their proper work thoroughly, the gang promptly went to the warpath with renewed vigor and extended scope, and ranked in the plunder in both hands from the honest and dishonest alike. It will be readily understood that no state of affairs could possibly be more distasteful to Mr. Inspector Lipinski than this. Not only was his professional credit at stake, but men like Mickey Morrison, Ike Cohen, Sandy Fraser, and Alexander McAdam, whom he absolutely knew either to be or to have been involved in extensive I.D.B. transactions, but who were now getting rich, and therefore men of influence in a town where faculty of making money anyhow was the only one that got a man on, while making sarcastic comparisons between Hounslow Heath 100 years ago and the diamond fields of today, and were asking ugly questions about the efficiency, nay, even the incorruptibility of the police force in general and the detective department in particular. It was this last suspicion that touched the puzzled and harassed inspector most keenly. As a practical man, he had no belief in miraculous escapes or the possibility of people being in two different places at once, and gradually the conviction forced itself upon him that the immunity of the gang from capture and its evasion of trap after trap, that he had laid it with all the skill and cunning at his command, could only be due to the connivance of some of his own men and the Free State Police, which he knew to be anything but immaculate. This conviction led him at last to the resolve to risk not only reputation and position, but life itself in the attempt to personally break up the gang, or at least to penetrate the mystery which shrouded its doings and shielded it from justice. This resolve once made, it did not take a man of his character very long to translate it into action. He caused certain information to leak out through some of the underground channels which were always at his service, to the effect that, in consequence of strong suspicions that the Diamond Mail to Freiburg was going to be held up by the border gang on a certain night, when it would be carrying an exceptionally valuable consignment of gems, the stones would be run the night before, as though they were an illicit parcel, over the border to Freetown, and thence conveyed in the usual way to Port Elizabeth instead of Cape Town. The Diamond Mail of the following day was to take no consignment at all, but be accompanied by a double guard. On the appointed night, the inspector had a score of his best and most trusted men, armed to the teeth, posted along the border within hail of the point where the road to Freetown crosses it. On the other side of a detachment of Free State Police were, by arrangement with the district chief, to be lying in wait, ready to act in concert with them, and to catch the gang between two forces at the moment of attack. When Inspector Lipinski set out that night to take his part of the working in the scheme, he took an even more than usually affectionate leave of his daughter, a pretty, graceful girl of 16 or 17, who was the incarnation of one romance in his life, the daughter of the only woman he had ever looked upon to love and long for, and the one rose that he had saved from the paradise which had once dwelt in. He went to his office and changed his usual attire for a suit of clothes that he had never been seen in, a sort of semi-sporting rig that he had had up specially from Cape Town, and put his favorite Smith Wesson in his right-hand coat pocket, and started out to walk the Beaconsfield. On the way over, his Kaffir groom, leading his best horse, he mounted and saw that the pair of heavy colts and the holsters were ready for the immediate use, and then he cantered off towards the border, which he had timed himself to reach a little before 1 in the morning. It had been arranged that 2 of his own men should hail him just before he got to it, and that then the game was to begin. News had reached him that the gang had got wind of the big parcel he was supposed to be carrying, and had vowed to have him at any price. If his men only did their duty, and the Free State Police kept faith with him, the new terror on the border would be a thing of the past by morning. 2 mounted figures loomed out of the darkness ahead of him, and pulled up on either side of the road. A gruff hail came growling down the wind. "Is that you, Davies? Mays? All right. I suppose the others are ready. Open a bit and let me through. Then chase for all you've worth. You needn't be afraid of catching me." As he said this, he touched his horse with a spur, and to make the easy canter broke into a gallop. The two men pulled their animals aside. As he came up, the moon broke through a rift in the clouds, and he saw that they were both masked. It was too late to stop. He ducked his head and dived for his Smith Wesson, but the next instant a rein of plaited rope of rawhide stretched out taut over the road, and passed over his horse's head and took him under the chin. Then came a jerk that nearly broke his neck, and a thump against the hard mud of the road, a mist of dancing stars before his eyes, and then darkness. When he came to himself, he was half sitting, half lying in a hammock deck chair, in the same little hut which Ikey Cohill had witnessed the murder of poor little Tommy. There was a burning taste of raw brandy in his mouth and throat, and his head was aching terribly. He looked up and saw a man in a black cloth mask over the upper part of his face, sitting astride a wooden chair in front of him, his arms across his back, looking at him through the eye holes in his mask. Even in the first moments of returning consciousness, he seemed to recognize something familiar about him, and the seeming soon became certainty. "Evening, Inspector. Coming around a bit. That's right. Been waiting a time to have a little bit of a chat with you. Feel up to it now? Have another nip?" There was no mistaking that drawn tone or the clip of the word ends. The inspector's rallying thoughts went back to the night at Freetown, nearly 18 months ago now, for the sake of a personal pique and threatened reputation, he had sanctioned, in fact assisted in the doing so, of a deed of treachery and violence, the one unlawful, unmanly act in his life, which he chose the worst of offenses laid to the charge of the gang would compare only too favorably. Now he felt instinctively that he was in the presence and at the mercy of the chief of the band of outlaws against which he had declared war to the death, a man who owed him a grudge that life would hardly pay. Still, he had deliberately staked his life on this very venture, and he was not the man to take his stakes off the table when the game was going against him. He looked in silence at the masked man for a few moments to let his thoughts get into something like order. Then he said quietly, "Well, Mr. Salter, I confess I never expected to see you in the flesh again, but since you have manifestly resurrected, I don't quite see the point of the mask of yours, at least not in private life." "Resurrected? By thunder, Sonny, you've hit it in the once. Say, did you ever see anything more like last year's corpse than me?" He tore the mask from his face, and he uttered the last word. The inspector staggered to his feet and dropped back into the chair with a gasp of amazement, and the groan of horror mingled with the same breath. What had been Seth Salter's not uncomely face was now a one-eyed, noseless mass of pits and seams and scars too hideous to imagine. "Yeah, it looks sort of pretty, don't it? Don't seem to think too much of it. Well, perhaps not. 'Tain't likely. But if you and your chaps didn't exactly do it, them was you're kind enough to leave me in the yonder, and the kloof did. Yes, sir, that's vulture's work. I had a bullet of yours right through my arm and one through my chest to your slouches, and a crack over the head with a carbine stock that'd knocked the gruel out of some people's skulls. So, you see, I hadn't much chance again the critters, but I thought I'd fight to finish, and I have done the Cape lad hadn't come through the kloof before I was done, and toted what was left of me to his hut, and fetched an old Kaffir medicine man to patch me up." You needn't trouble to make any remarks. You're weak yet, and I'm on the deck just now. I'll make things shorter and pleasanter if you just make yourself comfortable and hear me out. I shan't worry whether what happened to me just after. I got better, and had one eye and mouth left, and you see, and the eye had to look around for something to put in the mouth. Well, after considerable ups and downs, I met your Lieutenant Mays way down in Noddle. I told him who I was or had been, for you'd bet he didn't recognize me, and we put our heads together and worked out the border gang scheme. I found the requisite hard cases for the actual work, and got round to your chaps, and kept 'em off the scent, as the case might be. The game worked like an angelic picnic. We robbed thieves and the thieves ain't split. And then as an organization got better, we extended things. By about 3 months ago, we had half your chaps and nearly all of the slops on this side in our pay. Well, we've made tons of money and we're just thinking about retiring into respectable society, but Mr. Lipinski, there's just two things I want to do before I do that. And those are revenge on me and what else, may I ask? I guess you're a nervy little man, and you may ask. Yes, one of them's to square up things with you, and the other's to clean out the mail when it comes to the big consignment that you tried to fool us over tonight on board, which I take it'll be on the day after tomorrow, or I should say today, for it's morning now. Well, you've got safe and all the guard but two chipping in with us, so that's as good as done. May I ask again what you intend to do with me in the way of squaring things up with me? Something with vultures in it, I suppose. I can't growl under the circumstances, though for the sake of my own conscience, I'd like to tell you that we honestly thought that you were dead before we left you. I can't think how you stood all we gave you. What a thousand pities you didn't just have the stones and give up quietly. I guess it is for you, but why didn't you let me keep up and after I played the game and run 'em fair and honorable? Well, that's nowhere. I didn't think you were a white man in the grit all through. I would have given you a chance. I've had living bones, so to speak, picked clean by tomorrow night, and a mite nearer than mine. I believe you did think me dead, so I'll give you a square show. But I'm going to give you half an hour's hell first, just to even things up for what I had when I was fighting the vultures. And that? I'm going to make you play with me Chicago, best 7 games out of 13. If I win, I shall plug you fatally and go and clean out the mail. If you win, I'll give you back your shooter and back one eye again, and your 2 shooting on the drop. I'll set the alarm to go off at 2 minutes, and we've taken our places. And then when it goes off, we'll go, one or both of us. That's about as fair as I can afford to be. What do you think? I don't see much hell in that, to tell you the truth. No, because you seem to have forgotten that Miss Radna's gone down with the mail that day. You know, I admired her a lot. How did you think she'd like to have some stones we all got when I had 'em cut for her as a wedding present? I shouldn't take the dead gems and be living in the best of 'em all behind, you bet. That'll do, curse you. Get out the dice. Well, that's business anyhow, if you ain't over grateful or polite. Take a drink first to steady your hand. No? Then I will. Here's the dice. We'll shake for the first throw. Now, for the instruction of the unsophisticated, the game of Chicago is played with dice in this wise. 5 dice are thrown. Aces count 100, the first 6 thrown 60, the others 6. From 5 down to 2 spots are counted. 1 bone must be left on the table for each throw. Hence, there are 5 throws, and the highest possible is 5 aces, counting 500. The 2 played in silence. People usually do when the stakes are big, so that if they lose, they can never play again. Fates may have been looking over their shoulders and enjoying the deadly game, for they drew it out in the utmost length. For the 10th game, Salter was 2 ahead, and the Inspector won the 11th by 6, and the 12th by 7. 6 and 7's 13, and we've a 13th game to play, said Salter, shaping the first actual sentence that had been spoken since the play began. Shouldn't wonder if I lost now. That's right, help yourself. Whiskey's good for shooting. My throw, I reckon. He shook up the dice and canted the box gently over. The dice trickled out in a little white rattling stream. When they settled, there were 2 aces, a 6, a 4, and a 2. 260's not a bad start, but I guess I'll give the aces another chance. He shook up the 3 dice. They came out an ace and 2 sixes. His score was now 360, with 2 more throws, but he had the option of leaving the 6 or including it in the next throw on the chance of getting an ace instead of it. He left it and threw the 2. but came up 6 and 4, making his total 424 with one more throw. He tossed the 4 into the box and sent it rolling on the table, and when it stopped, it was a 3. "I've seen better," he said as he gathered the dice into the box and pushed it over to the inspector. "But anything over 400 takes figures to beat it." Lipinski's first throw was a poor one. 6, 5, 2 threes, and 2. On the second throw, 3 aces came up together, making the score 360. The other was a 4. He picked it up and threw it again and made 3 of it. He tried again and made it a 6. He was now 424 behind. "Tough luck, but I guess you've got to try again, pard." The hand of the man was firm through the heart of the father was shaking when the inspector turned the box over the last time. "Ace, by thunder, I thought so. Well, if it ain't the luck of hell, tell me, where's your gun?" By every law, save for the unwritten code of gambler's honor, Inspector Lipinski would have been justified in covering Salter as he went for the alarm, and he had another very strong motive for doing it. But he didn't. He knew the game, and he played it. They took their places in opposite corners of the hut, about 8 paces apart. The little insomnia clock seemed to think itself a boiler factory by the time being, so loudly that it ticked off the final fatal seconds. Bang, 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 ting-ling, ting-ling, bang, bang, ting, bang, zip. It was a strange chorus his mortal ears ever heard, and the little clock seemed to think so, and it did its best to keep up its end. When it was over, Inspector Lipinski pulled himself up on his hands and, looking across the hut through a mist of blood and fog of smoke, saw Seth Sutler's one eye glaring at him over the barrel of a revolver which was swaying to and fro about a foot or so from the floor. Then he remembered that this Smith Wesson had only 5 chambers. Salter's Colt probably had 6. He saw the flame leap from the muzzle, and at the same instant Salter's head dropped with a thump on the floor. The red-hot knife seemed to pierce his shoulder, and then he dropped too, just too to hear the angry shouts and stamping of horseshoes outside. The Free State Police didn't mind winking for satisfactory considerations at I.D.B. or even at the peaceable form of a robbery under arms, but they had neither the stomach nor the heart for the share of blood guiltiness, and so when one of the inspector's traders dropped the hint at the real purpose for which he had been taken to the hut, the righteous, indignant commandant ordered an immediate raid on it. It got there 3 minutes too late. Salter was unconscious and bleeding to death with 5 bullet holes in him. The inspector was insensible too, but he revived and lived long enough to give the true story of what happened. The Dutch policeman wisely concluded that the process of whitewashing would be good for his soul, so he had the inspector's body conveyed with all honor across the border, and delivered it to British authorities, with such an account of the night's doings as fully ensured their being the last of the exploits of the border gang. "Yes," said the gentleman who had given me the main points of the foregoing narrative, as we sat under the veranda in the garden of the Central one night after dinner. "Yes, Lipinski was a good sort, a very good sort, and so was Salter. I knew them both and liked them both. It's a pity that 2 men should have to started off plugging at each other with lead, just when they had different ideas about the diamond trade. And it all went for nothing, too. There were I.D.Bs then, and there are I.D.Bs now. Only they work differently. Those infernal stones are too tempting, and as long as the diamonds are diamonds, there'll be I.D.Bs of some sort."